Welcome back to VMware View Administration Training. This time around, we're going to talk about printing. So in this lesson, we'll discuss the options that you have for setting up printers within your virtual desktops. And we'll talk very specifically about one of those options, location-based printing. That's a feature built into VMware View. Then we'll talk about how you configure location-based printing. Then discuss the mapping of printers using location-based printing. And finally do a walkthrough to show you how to set it up. So let's get started. So jumping right in, let's talk about the options for setting up printers within View desktops. First of all, you can simply set up all your printers on the client devices, and then allow the redirection of those printers into your View desktop. This uses the virtual printing option within the View agent. That is an option during the install of the View agent, so if you want to take advantage of this avenue, make sure to enable that when installing the View agent. It uses an OEM version of the thinprint.print technology, which provides a universal print driver for the View desktop to use. It also provides print job compression, which improves the transfer time, especially over slower connections. So those large print jobs that need to move across the wire from the virtual desktop to the client device in order to print can be done a lot quicker. Your second option is to use a login script to map printers. This is an approach that should be familiar to most Windows administrators, since this is the way that most printers have been mapped up to this point in time. You can use scripting logic in order to map printers based on users, group membership, computer names, or just about anything else you can pull as a variable within Windows. Now View does provide some additional variables for you to use when scripting. And these are found in the HKey current user volatile environment node of the registry. And some of them are even mapped directly to environment variables. Some examples of this are the IP of the client device, the machine name of the client device, and what type of device it is, among many others. And finally, you can use View location-based printing, which is a feature within View. So let's talk a little bit more in depth about location-based printing within View. It's used to map printers to the virtual desktop based on properties of the client. These printers can be mapped based on a combination of the client device's name, IP address, or MAC address, as well as the login credentials used by the user or the user's group membership. As part of the setup, you can define which of the printers will be used as the default. All the configuration of location-based printing occurs through group policy within your Active Directory environment. And which printers are used are based on a mapping table that you configure within your GPO. We'll get into this mapping in a little bit more detail in the next couple slides. Now, since location-based printing is working through the View agent to actually map the printer directly on the virtual desktop, you'll need to make sure that your parent image has all the print drivers that you'll need. This way they'll be available to all the virtual desktops, no matter which printer they may get. So now let's talk about how location-based printing is actually configured. First of all, you have to register a DLL file that ThinPrint provides. The reason why this is delivered as a DLL as opposed to just a normal ADM template is because the mapping interface that you use to create the mapping table is a custom-built GUI interface. There are both 32 and 64-bit versions, and they can be found in the install directory for VMware View Server. You simply need to copy the appropriate DLL to any computers that will manage this GPO. Oftentimes, this will be domain controllers, and possibly admin workstations. If your admins are using a VMware View desktop pool, this is an easy update to the parent image in order to give every one of the admins access to that DLL. And finally, of course, you need to register that DLL, making it available for use by the Group Policy Object Editor. So once you've gone through all those steps, you can go into your Group Policy Object, look under the Computer Configuration in the Software Settings section, where you'll see a new item that has been added to the GUI, called AutoConnect Map Additional Printer for VMware View. Inside of there, you'll want to double-click the Configure AutoConnect Map Additional Printers item, which will give you the configuration window for creating the mapping table. Once in that mapping table, you have a series of rows. Each row will define a specific printer's properties, including the name, the driver, the IP port or thin print port, and when using an IP, you need to specify the IP underscore as a prefix to the IP address itself, and a checkbox that defines whether or not the printer will be the default printer for the users. In addition to the printer properties, each row will contain a set of criteria that we can use to determine which printers will be mapped based on these criteria. The first of which is our main one for location-based printing, the client IP address. In this field, we can define a subnet or an entire range of IP addresses. In our scenario, we can define each floor or area of each floor to have a certain subnet. Based on the subnet that the client machine is on, we can configure which printer would be the closest to that particular device, even though they may be connecting to a generic desktop that anyone else in any other part of the building may connect to. This is extremely useful in hospital scenarios as well, where each floor or each department may have a different IP address range that they'll use. The next criteria is the client name. This doesn't inherently provide a location that we can interpret, but while placing clients out into the workspace, you could name that particular device based on its location, and then use that name to determine which printer should map. Next is the MAC address of the client device. While placing clients into the workspace, you would have to track which MAC addresses are being placed in which regions, and create a spreadsheet of that. Then, based on the spreadsheet, you can then enter those MAC addresses into these rows to determine which printers each client device will receive. Finally, you can do it based on username or group membership. While this makes it very difficult to determine location, it could be useful in a scenario where all of a department is located in one area, and that particular department either shares a printer with another department in the same location, or has a department-level printer dedicated to just that department. It could also be useful if you have multiple locations, and users are divided into different groups based on their location. So all the users in the New York office will print to the New York printer, while all the users in the LA office can print to the LA printer. So now let's put all of this into practice, and we'll start by mapping a printer through a login script. Those of you who have been doing Windows management for a while may find some of this information a bit of a repeat. So we'll start here in the sysvol directory for our domain under the scripts directory. I've already created this login script for us, but let's do a quick review of it. In the script, we start by creating an object of a wscript.network object, and I call it objnetwork. I then use this object to pull out the user's domain and the username and place them into the sdomain and suser variables. I then use those two values to grab the actual user object out of the domain and place it into ouser. One of the properties of ouser is the groups array, which I loop through in this for each structure, placing the actual group object into the ogroup variable each time. Each iteration through, I check to see if the name property of that group happens to be printer02. If it is, I call the add Windows printer connection function and provide it my printer that I shared out off the domain controller, since the domain controller is acting as my print server as well. And that's all there is to setting up the script at its most simplistic form. Now let's take a look at the printer02 group that I've created. Looking at the members, we'll see that Alexander has been added to this group and should receive this particular printer. Next, let's take a look at how to apply this login script to our users. In our group policy management console, I've already created a printer mappings group policy that's attached to the user accounts OU. So this particular policy will apply to all user accounts in my domain. We'll now edit this group policy. Since we want this login script to apply to the users, we'll go under User Configuration, and then look in the Windows Settings section where we'll find a Scripts object. Here we can define a log-on and a log-off script. For our purposes, we'll set a log-on script. And then browse to our script, which again is located in the sysvol directory. And now we have a script that every user should run during logon. Now not every user will get a printer from this because we're doing that loop to make sure that the user has actually been added to the Printers O2 group before applying the group. If they're not a member of that group, then they won't get the printer. Now that we've set that up, let's go and log in as Alexander. Now that we've logged into Alexander's desktop, let's take a look at the printers that he has. And here you can see Network Printer O2 has already been mapped as part of the login process, and it's connected to from DC01, which is our print server. So that's what it takes to create a printer mapping based on a login script. It's a very well-known yet powerful way to map printers, because you can apply any logic that you can do within that scripting language, but it does require that each virtual desktop have all the print drivers that it could possibly need already installed. Now that we have a printer mapped using the login script, let's take a look how we can map printers using VMware View's location-based printing functionality. The first thing we need to do is to copy the DLL that enables the functionality of ThinPrint over to our domain controller where we manage our group policy. This DLL is found on our View server, on the C drive, under Program Files, in the VMware folder, under VMware View, Server, Extras, and then in Group Policy Files, under the ThinPrint directory, we choose x64 platform, where we find our ThinPrint DLL. We now need to copy this ThinPrint DLL over to our domain controller. In the UNC path for DC01 on the $share under VMware View. Now that we've got this copied over, we can switch over to our domain controller where we will use this in our group policy. Our first step is to register the DLL that ThinPrint uses in order to enable the functionality within our GPOs. I've already gone ahead and copied this DLL onto the domain controller where we manage our group policies. So go ahead and open up a command prompt. Use the regsvr32 command, pointing it to the C VMware View directory, and give it the name of our DLL. We've successfully registered the DLL. So now we'll go back over to our group policy object and take a look at the settings this will enable. I've already created a new GPO called Location-Based Printing that is applied to the vDesktops OU. So I'll go ahead and edit it. Once in our GPO, we can go under the Computer Configuration into the Software Settings section, where we'll find Autocorrect Map Additional Printers for VMware View. Clicking on that will give us the ability to double-click the Configure option, which brings up the UI for creating our mapping table. We need to start by enabling this policy, which gives us the ability to insert rows. For each row, we can define these different sets of parameters. The first column is the default, whether or not we want this to be the default printer once this policy is applied. We'll go ahead and check yes for that. The next set of columns are our translation rules that will determine which clients this particular printer that we put on this line will apply to. We can identify an IP range, a client name, a specific MAC address, or a specific user or group that the user may belong to. For now, we'll leave these all with the asterisk, which defines that any client or user will be able to access this printer. Next, we can define what the printer name will be. We'll call it Network Printer 01. Next, we need to enter the printer driver that this particular printer will need to use. This driver must already be installed in the parent image because location-based printing will connect the desktop directly to the printer. In my case, I'm connecting to an Epson Stylus Photo R800 printer that's being shared across the network. Next, I need to define the IP port that this printer can be found on. Since I'm using an IP address, I need to prepend it with the IP underscore, followed by the actual IP address of the printer. Now we can click OK. So that's how you set up location-based printing within VMware View. More often than not, you'll want to use the IP subnet range and the user or group account name, since these are the two most popular ways to define who a user is and where that user is located at. That is assuming that the different areas that printers are located within are limited by subnets. If they're not, you may need to reconsider changing how subnets are used in your facility, or come up with an alternative solution using either the client name, MAC address, or group membership. Since this policy is being applied to the vDesktops OU, where all of our View desktops are located within, this group policy will apply to all of our virtual desktops. Since our criteria within the Auto Connect Map Additional Printer setting define everything with an asterisk, it's going to apply to every user that logs into any virtual desktop. So let's switch over to our client device and have Alexander log in again so we can see the results of this new printer being added. Now that we're connected to Alexander's virtual desktop, let's take a look at his printers. Here you can see we still have Network Printer 02 connecting from DC01. We also have Network Printer 01, which, if we look at the properties, has been created by the TP AutoConnect service, which is the service that connects all of our thin print printers. If we click over into our Advanced tab, here you can see that it's using the Epson Stylus Photo R800 print driver. You may also notice that we have two additional printers in here. The Epson Stylus Photo R800 number 3 and the Microsoft XPS Document Writer number 1. These are both coming from redirections from the client device that Alexander is using. These are appearing now after enabling ThinPrint, because printer redirection, when using PC over IP as the protocol, is enabled by the ThinPrint functionality as well. So whether or not you want to use location-based printing, if you want to redirect printers from the client device into the virtual desktop, you need to make sure to enable the same policy that we used for location-based printing. So that's all it takes to set up location-based printing within VMware View, using the ThinPrint functionality. In this lesson, I'm not going to show you how to create a login-based network mapping, but it works somewhat similar, only it's going to be more script-based, using if statements or case statements within a batch file or VB script. As always, the pertinent information you need will be available in the View Administration Guide, so I recommend keeping that close at hand. If you're using 0 clients as your client devices, you may want to check out document 14416, available on VMware's community site, that discusses a few specific settings you'll need when using a 0 client. VMware also has a document out there that talks about the ThinPrint GPO configuration items in a bit more detail. Finally, VMware has produced another document specifically about location awareness within VMware View. This not only handles printing, but other items that may be location sensitive. So to wrap up, let's do a quick review. We started off with talking about what options are available for setting up printing within your virtual desktops. This includes redirection of client printers, where you would set up the printers on the client device and simply redirect them into the desktop. You also have the option of using a standard login script to map your printers, or you can use the location-based printing option available with View. Next, we talked about location-based printing, what it does and how it works. Then I went through the steps that it takes to configure location-based printing within View. Once you have location-based printing set up, you then need to go into the GPO and create a mapping table for the printers, in which you define IP ranges, usernames, MAC addresses, or client device names, and which printers those particular devices will get. And finally, I did a quick walkthrough to actually show you how to set up location-based printing within View, and what it looks like on the client side. So that'll do it for this lesson. Thanks a lot for watching, and I hope to see you in the next lesson.